In the cold autumn of 1912, a state inspector named Julian Ferris arrived in the small town of Merriwick, Maine, to assess an abandoned property slated for auction. It was a modest farmhouse, 2 stories, unpainted clapboard siding, roof caved in at the west corner. Nothing unusual on paper. Just another piece of neglected land fallen to taxes and disuse. But when Mr. Ferris asked the postmaster for directions, the man grew quiet and simply said, "If you find anything in there, don't bring it back." By the time the inspector returned to Augusta 3 days later, he had resigned his post without explanation, citing only health reasons. His final report, never formally filed, was discovered decades later tucked inside a forgotten file cabinet at the Maine State Archives. It contained only one sentence, written in a tight, shaking hand. Every boy who lived in that house died before his 13th birthday. There is no official explanation, no state record of a curse, no legal evidence of wrongdoing. But between 1847 and 1888, 6 families occupied that house, and in each case, the male children always, the boys never survived past age 13. Some died by fever, others by accident. One vanished without a trace. The youngest was 8. The oldest had only 2 weeks left before his birthday. They were not buried together. They belonged to different bloodlines. They came from different towns, different churches, and different trades. But all their names appear in the same faded registry, penned by a circuit doctor named Everett Langdon, whose personal notes include one peculiar phrase repeated after each death marked by the house. This is not a ghost story, at least not in the way you might think. There were no glowing figures in the windows, no whispers in the walls. What this story offers is something quieter, something colder, the kind of horror that sinks into old wood and waits, patient as time. What happened in Merriwick was never solved, but the records remain, the graves remain, and so does the house, or what's left of it, because some structures are never fully abandoned, and some names, once written, can never be erased. The earliest death, recorded at 43 Ashroot Lane, was in the winter of 1849. The child's name was Nathaniel Croft, age 12 years and 8 months. His mother, Margaret Croft, reported he had gone to bed with a mild fever and was found the next morning cold and arched like a bent nail. Her words, not the doctor's. There was no autopsy. The physician, Dr. Everett Langdon, attributed it to nervous seizure, likely brought on by ague or fright. Nathaniel was buried behind the house under a cairn of river stones, as snow had made the ground too hard to dig. By the time Dr. Langdon was summoned to the property a second time, in July 1854, he had already moved his practice to Bangor. But the letter from the new occupants, a farming family named Lasky, mentioned peculiar circumstances, and out of professional obligation, or perhaps curiosity, he rode north again. This time it was a boy named Eli, age 11. According to his mother, the child had grown too quiet in recent weeks, sleeping through the day, afraid of the sound of the cellar door opening at night. Though no one had heard it move, he was found sitting in the attic, legs crossed, hands folded, as if in prayer. He had not been taught to pray. The family was Unitarian. Dr. Langdon wrote in his notes, pulse absent, skin cool, eyes partially open, no sign of injury or struggle. Expression, serene. In death, he appears older, or rather, older things appear in him. He underlined that last sentence twice. Between 1849 and 1872, 4 more boys died in the house, each from different causes: a fall from the second-floor railing, an infection from a splintered foot, sudden bleeding from the nose and ears. The physicians changed. The handwriting in the death logs changed, but the pattern did not. Always the same house, always male, always before the age of 13. And then there was the case of Caleb Harrow. The Harrow family moved into the house in April of 1883. Caleb was 9 years old. His father, Daniel, had taken a post as the night foreman at the slate quarry west of town. His mother, Eliza, kept the home and taught piano to the daughters of neighboring families. Caleb was said to be a nervous boy, prone to headaches and frightened by sudden noises, but bright, kind, soft-spoken. He had a habit of watching the front door as if expecting someone or something to enter uninvited. In early March of 1888, Eliza wrote a letter to her sister in Vermont. That letter, now held in the archives of the Penobscot County Historical Society, contains a passage that historians and folklorists have debated for over a century. He says there is a space in the parlor floor that should not be stepped on after sundown. I told him not to be foolish. But last night, I walked across it barefoot and my whole body went cold. Not chilled, I mean wrong. The way a room feels after a lie is told. Caleb vanished 12 days later, 1 week before his 13th birthday. No sign of forced entry, no broken locks. His shoes were by the door, his coat still on the hook. His parents said he had been in his room reading scripture, the book of Job. The Bible was found on the floor, open to chapter 3. Let the day perish wherein I was born. There was no body, only a damp outline of a child's shape on the floorboards, and the smell of river water. The house was vacated by spring. In the autumn of 1889, a year and some months after Caleb Harrow vanished without trace, the town of Merriwick received an unexpected visitor. His name was Silas Greeley, 42 years old, unmarried, a clerk with the state registrar's office in Augusta. Greeley had thinning brown hair, no discernible vices, and a reputation for memorizing census tables with uncanny accuracy. He was not a detective, not a theologian, not a man given to speculation or ghost stories. He came only because of the numbers. Over the previous spring, Greeley had been tasked with updating Maine's mortality statistics, a dull responsibility that required compiling handwritten death logs from every county seat. It was while examining the ledgers from Penobscot County that something peculiar surfaced: not a single item, but a recurrence. 6 separate death entries, scattered over 4 decades, all originating from the same parcel of land, Lot 11B, Township 8, Range 4, known locally as Ashroot Lane. The names of the families were different. The causes of death varied. But Greeley noticed what no one else had: every dissident was male, every one a child, and not one had lived beyond their 13th birthday. He submitted a quiet request for the property's title history. When the documents returned, they confirmed what the death log suggested. 6 families, 7 boys, all dead before 13. The last, of course, being Caleb Harrow, whose body had never been recovered. Greeley requested leave from his position under the pretext of correcting on-site archival irregularities. It was a lie, though not a proud one. He simply needed to see the place for himself. The town of Merriwick was a 2-day journey by train and wagon, remote enough to be untouched by rail, but not far enough to be forgotten. He arrived just before the first frost, a stiff wind blowing off the river. The house at 43 Ashroot was still standing. Barely. It had been shuttered since the Harrows fled, and nature had begun its slow work of reclamation. The porch had collapsed at one end. The upper floor sagged in the center, like a spine worn down by age. Yet the bones of the structure remained. Strong. Too strong. Some said as though the rot feared to enter. Greeley made no announcement of his presence. He lodged quietly above the general store and spent his first 2 days examining town records. Merriwick had no official archive, but the church kept birth and death certificates in a set of oak drawers behind the pulpit. The reverend at that time, an elderly man named Amos Talbot, allowed Greeley to look through them so long as he didn't disrupt choir practice or ask the sort of questions that make a town unwell. Greeley didn't need to ask. The records spoke plainly. Every family who had occupied the house had lost a son. Not immediately, not violently, but always, precisely. Each death fell within the final year before the child's 13th birthday. Isaac Bell, age 12 years, 4 months. Eli Lasky, age 11 years, 9 months. Nathaniel Croft, age 12 years, 8 months. Thomas Rayner, age 10 years, 11 months. Joseph Field, age 12 years, 2 months. Caleb Harrow, disappeared at age 12 years, 11 months. There was no shared doctor after 1875, no shared pastor, no similar profession, but one detail, one maddening, cold detail repeated itself in the margin of each birth record. A notation penned by different hands in different ink over 4 decades, delivered in the east bedroom. Greeley visited the house on the 4th morning of his stay. He told no one where he was going. He carried only a notebook, a flask of brandy, and a brass key borrowed from the clerk of records, a key which the man handed over without comment, only crossing himself afterward and muttering, "If you hear your name called, don't turn around." The house smelled of damp wood and something older, the kind of smell you find in places no longer entirely aligned with the living. Greeley lit a lamp and moved cautiously, cataloging rooms, window positions, entry points. Everything appeared normal. At first decayed, but typical. But as he ascended the stairs, a sensation settled into his chest. Not fear, not dread. Something more mechanical, as if his heartbeat had begun keeping time with something upstairs. He found the east bedroom easily. The window faced the river, as expected. The walls were papered in a faded floral print. The floor was pine, water damaged at the far edge. But it was the shape, the arrangement of the room that unsettled him most. The proportions were wrong, not by measurement, but by feeling. The air was still, but it pressed. The light was dim, but it reflected strangely. The center of the floor was bare. No dust, no grime, as if nothing had dared rest there. He knelt, slowly, and placed his palm on the empty space. It was cold, not in temperature, cold in principle. Later that night, Greeley wrote in his journal, "It is not the house that remembers. It is the room. The east bedroom bears witness." I do not believe these boys died by illness or misfortune. I believe they were claimed. And something in that room keeps count. Silas Greeley returned to the east bedroom the next night. He brought no equipment, no measuring tools, no spirit board, no crucifix. Only his notebook, a pocket watch, and a folding chair borrowed from the vestry. He did not light a fire. The hearth in that room had long since crumbled. And besides, he wanted to hear. Cold has a way of making things quieter, more truthful. He sat precisely in the center of the room, the bare spot, the place without dust, and opened his watch. Midnight. He had not eaten since noon. Hunger sharpened him. Sleep tugged at his eyes, but he resisted. He wrote the date, October 19th, 1889. Then he closed the notebook, clasped it against his chest, and waited. For over an hour, nothing happened. The wind outside whispered as it always had. The floor creaked beneath its own memory. But there was no sound within the room. No movement. No voices. Until the 13th minute past 1 o'clock. Greeley heard it. A sound so soft he nearly missed it, like a toe tapping on wood. Not from beneath the floor, but within it. Repeating. 12 taps. 1 pause. Then 13 more. He leaned forward. The sound stopped. He leaned back. It resumed. Greeley's breath quickened. He took out his watch again. The second hand had stopped. He wound it. It did not move. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small square of paper, a birth registry copied from town records. The name Nathaniel Croft. Age at death, 12 years, 8 months. Date of death, October 19th, 1849. Exactly 40 years ago to the day. The floor beneath his chair groaned not loudly, but deeply, like a long-held breath being exhaled through stone. Greeley stood, suddenly lightheaded. The air in the room had changed. He could smell it now, iron and river mist, and something sweeter beneath it. Not rot, but remembrance. The kind of smell you find in old hymnals, pressed between pages, where a dried flower once lay. He turned toward the door and heard a voice. Not loud, not close, but inside the walls. It said his name, not a whisper, not a hiss. It was a boy's voice. Silas. He did not answer. He did not move. He simply waited. The voice came again. He said I wasn't old enough. The lamp dimmed, not flickered dimmed, as though the very air had absorbed the flame's will to live. Shadows lengthened. The walls tightened. And then silence. When Greeley stepped into the hallway, his knees buckled. The light outside the bedroom had changed, not brighter, but warmer, like late afternoon sun through amber glass. But it was not afternoon. It was dawn. He had lost 6 hours. He left the house in silence. No one saw him return to the boarding room. He did not sleep. He did not write. He simply sat at the edge of the bed, holding the pocket watch that had not ticked once since the moment he heard the 13th tap. When he finally opened his notebook again, he wrote, "It is not the dying that binds the place. It is the moment just before the threshold. The house doesn't take boys after they turn 13. It marks them for it. That's why it always stops at 12. 13 is not a number. It is a verdict." And at the bottom of the page, written in a darker hand, not his own, You will be the first to live through it. On the third morning, Greeley rode 5 miles north to the village of Dunstow, where he had arranged by post, weeks earlier, to speak with a man named Alvin Field. The name had first appeared in an 1861 land transfer involving Lot 11B, signed not by Alvin himself, but by his mother, Lydia. Greeley had traced the family line back to a pair of brothers, Joseph Field, deceased at age 12 in 1860, and Alvin, then aged 15. Alvin was the only known male born in the house who had lived past the age of 13. The man who greeted Greeley at the farmhouse was bent, near blind, and smelled of fennel poultice and mothballs. But his mind, once prompted, proved clear. Alvin hadn't spoken of the house in over 30 years. He never married, never sired children, never returned to Merriwick. He had told himself the silence would be enough, that forgetting was a kind of survival. But when Greeley placed the copied registry book on the table and pointed to his brother's name, something shifted behind Alvin's eyes. He agreed to speak, but only once. Joseph had been a quiet boy, Alvin said, sickly, often sleepless. He began talking to someone in the walls when he was 10. Not imaginary friends, not games, but conversations. Full replies, whole nights of murmuring back and forth. Their parents thought it was a phase. Alvin didn't. One night, he said, he pressed his ear to the wood behind Joseph's bed, and he heard a second voice, one that wasn't his brother's, one that knew his name. On the morning Joseph died, he had told their mother he would not need shoes. "Where I'm going, we don't walk," the boy said. Later that day, he collapsed in the yard without warning. No wound, no fever, no spasm. Just gone. The doctor called it vapors of the chest, a meaningless phrase even then. They buried him beside the back fence, near the river trees. But Alvin said the strangest part came weeks later, after their mother fell into a hush that never quite lifted. She started peeling the wallpaper off the east bedroom, section by section, until she reached the plaster beneath. And there, written in something not quite ink, not quite soot, were the names of every boy who had lived in that room. All in the same hand, all dated. The last name, written a week before his brother's death, was Joseph Field. The one before that was Eli Lasky. And beneath both, faintly, was his own. Alvin left the house that same night, took nothing but a coat and a book of Psalms. Never returned. The wall, he believed, had marked him and for some reason let him go. Greeley asked if he had ever wondered why. Alvin only looked away and said, "Some traps don't want what can see them." Before leaving, Greeley asked for one last favor. Had Alvin ever written down what he'd seen? A record, a drawing, anything. Alvin shook his head. Then, after a pause, went into the next room and returned with a folded scrap of parchment. It was dry, curling at the edges, but the charcoal markings were clear a floor plan, not of the house, but of that room, with symbols etched where the floor creaked, a circle marked at the center, and at the bottom, a single phrase, penned in a younger hand than Alvin's. Only the ones who are still children can hear the bargain being made. Greeley returned to the house that same evening. The map from Alvin Field, now pressed between the pages of his ledger, had become more than a reference. It was a key. The sun had begun its descent when he stepped through the warped doorway once more. No birds sang along Ashroot Lane. The wind had stilled. Even the trees seemed to lean away from the structure, as if no longer willing to offer it shelter. He climbed the stairs without a lamp. The floor knew him now, and he knew it in turn. Inside the east bedroom, he did not hesitate. He unrolled Alvon's drawing and placed it on the floor beside him. The creaking points matched precisely. He tapped his heel where the first X lay, and the plank gave a hollow note, different from the others. He moved clockwise, following the marks, until he had tapped all 7 points. Each responded with a different tone, not discordant, but intentional. The circle, as drawn by Alvin, wasn't decoration. It was notation. The floor sang, and the room, it seemed, was listening. At the center where Alvin had drawn the last symbol, a crude spiral resembling a shell or a closed eye, Greeley knelt. He pressed his palm to the floor. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then he heard it again, 13 taps. Slow, deliberate, echoing deeper than before. But this time, they didn't stop. A 14th came, then a 15th. With each one, the air in the room thickened, not warmer, not colder, but denser, as if every breath had to pass through syrup. The boards beneath his hand pulsed, not with heat or life, but with recognition. He tried to stand, but found his legs stiff, like joints not used in years. And then the boards gave a sharp, dry pop. A plank lifted not fully, not loudly, but enough to reveal darkness beneath. Not a crawl space, not a cellar. A space with no scent, no echo. A void that rejected light. Greeley leaned closer, not to see, but to listen. And what he heard, what he swore he heard, was breathing. He pulled back, heart stuttering, reached into his satchel and removed a length of twine with a brass weight. He dropped it into the gap, let it fall. After several seconds, he felt it tug, not by force, but by interruption. Something had caught it mid-drop. He reeled it back up. The weight was gone. The twine ended frayed, as if chewed. But there were no teeth marks. Only ash. He rose, gathered the map, and left the room without turning his back to the opening. As he descended the stairs, the boards behind him groaned once, not as underfoot, but like ribs stretching after sleep. Outside, the stars had begun to appear, and for the first time, he realized they did not sit where they should. Orion's belt slanted too low. The North Star blinked red. Time, he thought, was slipping. That night, in the safety of his rented room above the general store, Greeley drew the circle again by hand. This time, he added something of his own. In the center spiral, he wrote a word that had not appeared in any registry, record, or town folio, but had surfaced, unbidden, in his mind. When the breath from beneath the boards touched his hand, it remembers. 2 days passed before Greeley dared return to the house. In that time, he wrote a letter long, meticulous, to a former colleague named Reverend Lionel Ashe, a quiet scholar of abnormal theology. Ashe had once lectured in Boston on the concept of resident dwellings, structures not haunted by spirits, but habituated by memory itself. Greeley trusted his mind, trusted his restraint. If anyone could help him identify what slept beneath those boards, it would be Ash. He described the pattern of deaths, the registry records, the map drawn by Alvin Field. He did not mention the breathing. Not directly. Some truths he feared might listen when spoken. He mailed the letter from the Dunstow Post 2 towns over, choosing anonymity over convenience. He did not include a return address, only a direction. Reply to Silas Greeley, care of Jonas Silt, Merriwick General. It was enough. Then he waited. The reply came in less than 36 hours. This should have been impossible. The roads were mud, the post unreliable. And yet, the envelope bore Ash's distinctive hand angular, pale blue ink, with the S in Silas always curled like a noose. Greeley opened it at once. The paper inside was torn at the edges, as though handled in haste. There were no pleasantries, no greeting, only a single paragraph, scrawled with shaking emphasis. Leave that place. You are not studying a haunting. You are standing inside a ritual that has never ended. The deaths were not accidents. The boys were entitlements. Something beneath that house has been fed. Repeatedly. Intentionally. It may sleep, but it has not been forgotten. And it knows your name now. Do not write again. Burn this letter and leave. Greeley did not burn it. Instead, he read it again. Then again. Not because he doubted Ash, but because a line in the letter chilled him more than anything he had yet uncovered. The phrase, "It knows your name now." Greeley had never written his full name in the letter, only signed with an initial S, G. And Ash, methodical to a fault, would never assume. Someone else had filled in the rest. That night, Greeley dreamed not of death, but of repetition. In the dream, he was 10 years old again, reciting his catechism aloud in an empty church. But every time he reached the phrase, "Deliver us from evil," the words refused to pass. His jaw locked. His tongue turned dry. And behind him, from the pews, came the tap, tap, tap of small fingers on wood. He awoke drenched, lungs tight. One hand clenched around the watch he no longer remembered holding. The watch. Stopped since the night he first heard the 13th tap. Now ticked again, but backward. Seconds running in reverse. He wrote nothing in his journal that morning. Only folded the watch into a handkerchief, placed it in a drawer, and spoke aloud to no one in particular. "I am not 13. And somewhere faint, nearly inaudible, came the response. Not in words, but in the weight of the floor beneath his feet. A weight that had begun. Remembering, Greeley returned to the house on the 7th night. He brought no paper, no notebook, no instruments, only a lantern, a chisel, and the courage of someone who no longer feared answers, only the silence that preceded them. He had not intended to enter the space beneath the floor, but the letter from Ash had altered something. It confirmed what he had begun to suspect: the deaths were not side effects. They were payments. The floorboard he'd marked earlier lifted easier this time, as though it recognized him. The opening beneath was narrow, but not impassable. He lowered himself slowly, shoulders brushing timbers rough with age and rot. The air was colder than outside, not because of temperature, but because of memory. It felt like the inside of a mouth, mid-inhale. The lantern sputtered once, then steadied, and Greeley saw it. A room. Not in the blueprints, not in the county records, not in the memory of any living resident, but it was there. A space no wider than a nursery, with walls of packed earth and ceiling just high enough to kneel beneath. No furniture, no foundation stones. Only the circle identical to Alvin Field's drawing, etched into the dirt with remarkable precision. And at the center, resting atop a piece of torn muslin, was a wooden object, a spinning top. Simple, hand-carved, worn smooth from use. But what stopped Greeley cold was the name scorched into its side in crude block letters. Silas. Not etched, not painted. Burned. And not recently. The wood had aged around it, darkened by years. Maybe decades. He picked it up. It was warm to the touch. The kind of warmth that didn't come from sun or fire, but from holding on too long. He tried to stand, but the ceiling pressed low. The space shifted slightly, like breath catching in lungs. On the wall opposite the opening, the earth had been scraped recently, as if by fingernails. Dozens of overlapping lines, and between them, faintly visible beneath the dirt drawings, childlike, circles, houses, a stick figure lying down, and next to it, a second figure standing. Greeley brushed more dirt away. Beneath the image, scratched deeper than the others, was the phrase he doesn't like when they leave. He did not stay long. The climb out of that chamber took more effort than expected. The air felt thicker, the distance longer, as though he'd fallen deeper than the laws of space allowed. When he emerged into the east bedroom, it was night again, though it had only been dusk when he descended. The wind outside had risen, and somewhere in the trees, a fox screamed once, sharply, then fell silent. Greeley placed the spinning top on the floorboards, where the sunlight might touch it, come morning. But when he turned to go, he heard it spin, not roll, not drop, spin. And the sound that followed was unmistakable, a child's breath, long and steady as if exhaling after being noticed. Silas Greeley left Merriwick just after dawn. He didn't pack. He didn't return to the boarding house. He simply walked down the narrow path that led away from Ashroot Lane, past the tree line that now seemed to bend inward, as if reluctant to let him go. The sky was gray and unmoving. Not a single bird stirred. His footsteps made no echo. It felt less like departure than release. By midday, he reached the neighboring town of East Haven. He went straight to the county registrar's office. The clerk, a mild old man with ink-stained sleeves, handed over the birth register without comment. Greeley flipped through the familiar pages, each one brittle with time, until he reached his own Silas Everett Greeley, born November 12th, 1846. But something had changed. In the margin, written in fresh brown ink that had no business being there, were 5 words, marked in the east bedroom. His throat tightened. He flipped backwards, toward the earlier years. Then he saw it again. Joseph Field, born 1848, died at 12, in the same unfamiliar hand. Another note had been added beneath his name. He still remembers. No clerk had written that. Not recently. Not legally. Greeley closed the register with trembling hands. Outside, the wind had changed direction. He bought a train ticket, eastbound destination Boston, or further. He didn't plan to return. He sat alone by the window, watching the woods slide past like slow-moving water. But the trees looked different now. Darker. Too close together. Too still. The train didn't seem to be going anywhere, only circling some unnamed center. As night fell, the conductor passed through the aisle. He didn't speak. Just paused at Greeley's seat and handed him something small, wrapped in muslin. It was the spinning top. The same one from beneath the floor. Still warm. And underneath it, a folded scrap of paper, written in the same childlike, burned lettering as before Silas. You stepped outside the story. Greeley left the train at the next stop. No one saw where he went. 2 weeks later, a new clerk at the registrar's office found a folded note tucked inside the birth registry for 1846. It was unsigned. It read, "The house does not haunt. It remembers. And it waits until the right name is said at the right time, by the right voice. 3 times. Then it opens. Back in Merriwick, the house still stands. The east bedroom remains locked from the inside, though no key exists. And on certain windless nights, passers-by say they hear something faint, the whirring of a small wooden toy spinning against old floorboards. Not fast, not slow, just steady, as if someone or something was keeping count.